Cold wind moved across the airfield outside Casablanca as rows of tents trembled under the morning light. Trucks rolled slowly through the dust, engines rattling, soldiers stepping aside while clutching maps and metal cups. General George S. Patton walked between them with a steady pace, coat open, helmet strapped tight, boots striking the ground in short, sharp impacts. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the clutter of cables, crates, and hurrying aides. A broken French farmhouse stood at the edge of the camp. Smoke rose from a barrel near the door where mechanics warmed their hands. Patton stopped beside them, observing the sky. Allied bombers passed overhead in a slow formation, their shadows sliding across the ground. He narrowed his gaze at the distant coastline, where the Atlantic glimmered behind thin waves of haze. A jeep braked beside him. Major Hunter stepped out holding a folder. Message from headquarters. Hunter said. Patton took the folder without looking at the major. He opened it, scanning the first lines. German radio transmissions. Intercepts. Shifts in enemy movement around Tunisia. A change in tone. A change in confidence. Something subtle. Something overdue. He closed the folder. They're starting to see it, Patton said. Hunter straightened. Sir. Patton walked toward the command tent. The major followed, boots crunching through dry gravel. Inside, lanterns flickered over maps spread across a long table. Colored pins marked ridgelines, supply routes, German positions. Officers gathered silently as Patton approached. He pointed to the central map. They know the tide just turned. Colonel Rayburn stepped closer. We intercepted new chatter last night. The Germans finally admit the Allied buildup isn't temporary. They expect us to take the offensive. Patton tapped the map with his knuckle. About time they woke up. Outside, the camp buzzed with restless energy. Artillery crews checked their guns. Tank mechanics pulled engines apart with oil-covered hands. A group of infantrymen marched drills in formation, rifles rising and falling in unison. Patton pushed the tent flap aside and watched them. Their movements were slow, still recovering from recent landings, still adjusting to a new theater, still carrying the weight of earlier mistakes. He stepped out and walked among them. Boots halted. Helmets turned. Keep your rifles up, he said. The men corrected their posture. He walked past. A small grin crossed one soldier's face as Patton continued forward. The general stopped and turned. You think something's funny, son? No, sir. Good. There's nothing funny about men who underestimate us. The Germans made that mistake for 3 years, and now they're realizing it. He left them and moved toward the motor pool. Tanks lined the dirt field in neat rows. Their engines rumbled as crews tested them. Patton dragged a hand along the cold steel of the nearest turret. A mechanic approached, wiping grease from his fingertips. She's ready, General, the man said. Patton stepped onto the front hull, peering across the line of machines. They'll know we're coming, Patton said, but knowing won't stop it. He jumped down and looked toward a ridge in the distance where the horizon faded into a pale blue. A convoy of supply trucks was making its way along the main road, rumbling deeper into Allied-held territory. Dust shaped long trails behind them. Patton's aide came running from the radio tent. Sir, London wants confirmation of your assessment. They're asking whether the Germans are actually shifting their intelligence priorities. Patton folded his arms. Tell them this. Intelligence doesn't shift unless fear shifts first. The aide nodded and ran back. The air grew still for a moment. Patton stood alone in the wide field, the morning sun settling on his helmet. He watched the horizon again, focusing as though the land itself were speaking. His jaw tightened. He returned to the command area. Inside, officers gathered around the long table again. Patton pointed to the western flank on the map. They'll reinforce this line. They'll fortify the mountains. They'll pull experienced officers into Tunisia. They finally know the war isn't going their way. Rayburn nodded. It means they'll fight harder. Patton leaned forward. Good. Nothing worth winning comes from the enemy giving up. He rolled the map down and tied the strap. A runner entered. General, reconnaissance patrol reporting in. They spotted aircraft moving east. Probably reassignments. Patton grabbed his binoculars and stepped outside. He climbed a small hill nearby and raised the lenses to the sky. Small specks appeared in tight formation. German aircraft. He tracked them as they glided toward the far horizon. He lowered the binoculars. They're pulling back to protect what's left. They think our advance is inevitable. Hunter looked at him. Is it? Patton didn't answer. He simply stared at the empty sky where the enemy planes had vanished. Back at camp, soldiers assembled near the mess tent. Patton observed them from a distance. Their faces carried exhaustion, stubble, dirt, and silent expectation. He watched them receive bread, soup, rations. He heard fragments of conversations, questions about home, doubts, quiet hopes, the small sounds of men preparing for something heavier than they could clearly define. He stepped closer. 2 soldiers saluted. Patton nodded. You boys eating enough? Yes, sir. The next few weeks will test you, Patton said. When the Germans realize they're losing, they'll stop pretending to be invincible. That's when they're dangerous. The men exchanged glances. Patton moved on. He walked toward the coastline. Waves crashed softly against the rocks. Allied ships rested on the water, their silhouettes dark against the gray horizon. Patton watched them, his arms behind his back. He listened to the wind, the distant engines, the rhythmic break of water against shore. Behind him, officers approached. We received confirmation, Rayburn said. German intelligence is revising its estimates. They believe we'll mount a major offensive. Patton turned halfway. Belief is a gift. We'll let them keep it for a while. A long silence stretched across the scene. The sea continued breaking against the rocks in slow repetitions. Patton removed his gloves and held them at his side. This is the moment, he said. The exact moment a defeated army realizes it's losing. And they can't stop it. He looked out at the water again. Let them feel it. The scene held still as the light shifted across the camp, catching the edges of tents, tanks, and scattered metal. The wind rose again, carrying dust along the ground and bending the fabric of the flag above headquarters. Patton remained facing the horizon, motionless. The day's conflict, silent, invisible, newly awakened, hung in the air around him. Night settled unevenly across the camp, broken by scattered lanterns and the low hum of engines preparing for movement. The Mediterranean wind pushed dust through the narrow pathways between the tents. Patton stood near the radio station, helmet under his arm, watching technicians struggle to stabilize a connection with forward scouts. A burst of static filled the tent. Try again, Patton said. An operator nodded and adjusted the dials. The speaker crackled. A thin voice came through. Enemy armor repositioning toward the high ridges, increased traffic east of Kasserine. Patton leaned closer. Confirm direction. East, sir. Fast. Looks like a pullback and regroup. The signal faded. Patton stepped outside, tightening his gloves. Rayburn approached. They're consolidating. They're scared, Patton said. Scared men make desperate moves. A jeep arrived at speed, brakes screeching as it slid to a stop. Captain Ellis jumped out with dust on his coat. General, he said, holding a captured German map. Recon squad picked us up after skirmish. You should see it. Patton unfolded the map against the hood of the jeep. Enemy supply lines were circled in red pencil, with new arrows pointing inward toward the mountains. Not outward, not toward expansion, toward retreat. He tapped the paper twice. They're building a shell. Ellis nodded. Their officers must understand the numbers now. Patton folded the map sharply. Then we pushed before they thicken it. Far across the camp, mechanics struggled to mount a fresh track on a Sherman tank. The metal clanged against the hull. Sparks burst as a torch cut through a bolt. Patton walked toward them, stepping over discarded tools. How long? He asked. 2 hours, sir. A mechanic answered without looking up. You have one. The man nodded and worked faster. The rest of the crew tightened bolts, hammered joints, wiped grease with the sleeves of their uniforms. Near the artillery pits, crews loaded crates of shells into stacks. Patton's boots thudded against the packed dirt as he moved between them. Soldiers straightened instinctively. You'll fire before dawn, Patton said. Be ready when the mountains light up. A young gunner raised his hand slightly. "Sir, is it true the Germans know they're losing?" Patton stood in front of him. "They know the truth," he said, "and the truth makes them dangerous. But it won't save them." The gunner nodded and returned to securing a crate. Across the field, Hunter ran toward Patton carrying a decoded message. "Intercept from Tunis," he said. "German High Command warns their officers. Prepare for prolonged defense under deteriorating circumstances." Patton tilted his head. "They said it. They said the word." "Deteriorating," Hunter repeated. Patton exhaled once. "Now they'll fight like cornered animals." The camp suddenly echoed with shouting from the perimeter. A guard rushed past. "General, enemy aircraft spotted north." Patton stepped into the open and looked up. Dark silhouettes cut across the moonlit sky. The engines roared overhead. No bombs fell. The planes crossed the camp and vanished toward the mountains. "Reconnaissance run," Patton said. "They're mapping our layout." A lieutenant approached. "Sir, want us to reposition the tanks?" "No," Patton said. "Let them look. They'll see movement. They'll assume we're nervous." He paused. "We're not." The lieutenant saluted and hurried back. Patton walked toward the ridge overlooking the camp. He climbed the slope alone, boots sinking into loose gravel. At the top, he stopped and surveyed the entire installation. Columns of vehicles stretched across the valley. Lanterns flickered inside tents. The distant coastline shimmered faintly under moonlight. Hunter reached the top of the ridge a moment later, breathing heavily. "They're preparing a counterstroke," he said. "Reports say Rommel wants a fast blow before we build momentum." "And he's late," Patton replied. He crouched and picked up a small stone from the ground. He turned it between his fingers. "When an army senses defeat," Patton said, "it looks for something to hit. Not to win, to feel alive." Hunter watched the valley below. "What if they attack tonight?" "They won't," Patton said. "They're not ready. They're reacting, not planning." Torches flickered along the transport road as trucks delivered ammunition and fuel. The drivers shouted instructions over the engines. Patton stood still, observing how the camp accelerated with each passing hour. A messenger reached the ridge with a leather pouch. "Urgent report," he said. Patton opened the pouch and removed a set of papers. He scanned the first page. German intelligence updates. A shift in their assessment. A note indicating the Allied armored strength was higher than expected. A predicted offensive window narrowed to days, not weeks. Rayburn reached the ridge. "They know we're close." Patton handed him the paper. "Knowing doesn't stop a punch. It just tells you when it's coming." Below them, a line of infantry marched toward the assembly area. Canteens rattled at their hips. Rifles swung with each stride. Officers called out names and positions. Patton descended the ridge and walked directly into their path. The line stopped. Men watched him, waiting. "You heard the rumors," Patton said. "You heard what the enemy finally admitted." No one spoke. Helmets glinted under the lanterns. They know the war has changed, but they don't understand what that means for them. He stepped closer. "It means we don't stop. Not now." The line tightened. Some men adjusted their grips on their rifles. "You don't hesitate because the enemy finally woke up," Patton continued. "You press harder." He walked past them and signaled for the march to continue. Boots struck the earth again in heavy rhythm as the column advanced. Near the command tent, officers gathered for an emergency meeting. Patton entered without slowing. "Give me positions," he said. Rayburn pointed at the map. "Enemy armor here. Artillery regrouping on the ridge. Infantry pulling back to defensible terrain. They're forming a pocket." Patton leaned over the table. "And when a pocket closes, something inside breaks." He traced a line across the map with his index finger. "We strike here." Before they finished tightening the shell, they think they're adjusting to the new reality. They're not. They're digging their grave. Silence filled the tent. Outside, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from tank engines warming to full power. Headlights swung across the dirt. Crews climbed onto hulls. Officers shouted final orders. Patton stepped out into the night, coat whipping behind him. He walked toward the first line of tanks. One crewman looked down at him. General orders? Patton placed a hand on the tank's armor. Prepare to move, he said. We're not waiting for the enemy to figure out what's already happened. The engines intensified. The ground trembled beneath them. Flames from the exhaust glowed red against the darkness. Patton lifted his helmet onto his head and tightened the strap. The situation had shifted. The enemy had realized the truth. Now came the moment where the truth demanded action. Engines idled in the darkness. Low growls cradled by the night air. Tanks lined up side by side on the barren field. Turrets pointed toward the ridge. Soldiers moved between them. The clink of metal tools, the rustle of uniforms, the murmur of whispered orders. Patton walked along the lines. Headlight beams glinted off steel. A loader climbed onto a turret. Wiping his brow with the back of his glove, Patton stopped beside him. When the dawn breaks, he said, we'll show them daylight doesn't favor hiding. The gunner nodded once, silent. Nearby, in a trench dug for observation, Captain Ellis studied a pair of binoculars. He scanned the distant hills. Sparse figures moved near rocky outcrops. Shadows flickered uncertainly. He dropped the binoculars and pocketed them. Patton stepped into the trench. Report. Ellis lifted his gaze. They're active, sir. Radios passing messages. Men reinforcing positions near Jebel Ridge. Patton stared at the silhouettes beyond. Reinforcement means fear. Fear means weakness. Ellis swallowed. Yes, sir. Patton climbed out of the trench, boots flicking dirt. He moved toward the command tent, where officers gathered, maps spread across crates lit by a single lantern. A wind picked up outside, pushing the tent flap inward. Rayburn pointed at a cluster of dots on the map. The circled ridge, enemy armor, artillery, infantry all converge there. If we strike now, we might break their hold. Patton leaned over the drawing. His finger traced a bold line. We punch through here, he said. Then roll south. Cut supply, cut retreat. A sergeant entered the tent, leaning close. Sir, reconnaissance reports increase guard every 100 meters. They expect movement tonight. Patton looked up. Let them expect it. He reached for a chalk stick and circled the path on the map. The circle was thick, final. This ends tonight. Outside, the wind rose, stirring dust. Lantern flames flickered, casting tall, dancing shadows on the tent walls. The soldiers outside froze, hearing voices rising inside. Patton stepped out and climbed a small mound beside the tents. He raised his voice, strong and clear. Men, listen up. Silence sharpened across the camp. Rifles rested on shoulders. Officers dropped their heads. Soldiers straightened. We strike at first light, not because they expect us, but because they underestimate us. Heads lifted slowly. Faces hard, determined, alert. Patton paced slowly across the mound. Boots thundered softly. When the alarm rises, he said, we move. We move fast. We move hard. You hold nothing back. He stopped, looked at them. A pause stretched, heavier than the night. Win this, he said. Win this not for glory, but for every man who thought defeat would last forever. A collective murmur rose. A soldier gripped his rifle tighter. Another exhaled slowly. The line shifted forward, waiting. Patton climbed down. Officers raised their heads. He returned to the tent. Moments later, in the cold field near the fuel depot, soldiers loaded shells into the tanks. Artillery crews readied their guns. Mechanics closed hatches, locked turrets. The camp moved with purpose, every motion tight, rehearsed, deliberate. A light drizzle began, thin drops against metal. Quiet, cold. Patton stood alone at the perimeter, coat collar turned up. He watched the drops bead on turret steel. He touched a rivet with gloved fingers. Rain doesn't stop war, he muttered. Footsteps behind him. Hunter approached. Sir, last clear. Reports say no further enemy patrols detected. Patton flicked his helmet strap. Then we march. Hunter nodded. Far ahead, on the ridge, enemy flares popped once. Red lights drifted downward slowly, casting ghostly patterns across the hillside. Soldiers held rifles at their chests, watching. Some turned away, others swallowed hard. Patton lifted his arms. Go! In the instant that followed, wheels spun. Tracks crunched earth. Engines roared. Dust rose. Night fractured under the glow of headlights. Tanks moved forward, crawling through the dark. Artillery followed behind on flatbeds. The ground trembled under weight and resolve. Soldiers' muffled voices blended with metallic groans. A Sherman passed close to Patton's position. A loader glanced up, eyes wide under the helmet light. The crew held hard. Patton watched him, then looked toward the ridge again. Flashes erupted across the hillside. Artillery fire, tracer rounds, explosions. The tanks shuddered. Dirt sprayed. Night split in sharp, blinding lights. The first shells landed. The rumble rolled, louder than engines. Shells struck rock, turned earth to dust, shook the ground under steel tracks. Patton crouched behind a tank turret, staring upward. Light flared, then fell silent. Smoke rose thick, red drifted against black. The smell of cordite and burning earth filled the air. Soldiers shouted orders. Gutters of fire lit across the ridge as artillery pounded. Tank crews opened hatches, rifles poised. A roar of shells answered every flash. The ridge erupted in chaos. Patton stood, arms raised slightly, as if pushing back the darkness. "Push forward," he yelled over the blast. "Break their line." The lead tank surged ahead. Tracks tore through rubble and broken rock. Soldiers leaned in, determined. The ground shook. Metal crushed stone. The hull crushed rails of old enemy trenches. Walls of earth collapsed under steel. Inside the trench network, enemy troops scrambled. Orders barked out in German voices. Some fired back. Some raised white flags. Chaos and fear raced together. Muffled screams, the clang of weapons, the abrupt silence of surrender, flames crawling across dry grass, shellfire cracking open earth. The night cracked open too. A tank rolled over a ridgeline, silhouette sharp against fire-lit horizon. The survivors on the ridge dropped rifles, raised hands. Tanks halted, guns lowered. The roar died down slowly. Smoke drifted skyward under moonlight. Patton walked forward, dust swirling at his boots. He stepped over debris, spent shells, abandoned rifles. On the ground lay a torn flag, half buried in dirt. He stopped and bent down, picked it gently by its frayed edge. He let it hang limply. Around him, soldiers moved quietly, gathering prisoners, securing flanks, checking wounded. Flames from burning brush flickered on faces illuminated by lanterns and lamps. Patton unhooked his helmet. He held it at his side. He looked across the ridge. Empty guns, surrendered men, steel towers quieted. Silence settled again, slowly, as after a storm. The field glowed faintly under lanterns. Tanks idled. Soldiers stood at ease. Prisoners sat on rocks, guarded. The ridge's black outline softened in smoky light. Patton straightened, pushing his coat back. He looked at the sky, stars faint behind drifting clouds. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them. He addressed his men across the line, calm voice cutting through the quiet. "Today!" They saw what defeat looks like. An echo of voices rose, boots shifting, rifles lowered. Some gripped helmets. Others stared at the ground. Around him, men watched the surrendered lines. In the air lay the smell of burnt earth, oil, metal. Patton stepped forward again. He walked between tanks, over discarded gear. Staff officers approached, reporting casualty counts, prisoner numbers, supply status. He nodded once, then turned toward the ridge. The captured enemy units grouped under the fading flares. Some looked back, fear in their posture, shame in their stillness. Patton lifted a hand toward the ridge. Quietly, "Let them remember this," he said. No cheers rose. No celebration. Only the crackle of fires and distant murmurs of men securing the field. A single bugle sounded far off, a sharp call in the darkness, echoing across earth and silence. Soldiers paused. Rifles rested. The bugle faded. A wind moved through tents and metal. Patton picked up his helmet and replaced it. He walked toward the command tent. Officers followed. Inside, maps lay open again. Lights glowed low. Orders were issued. Prisoners counted. Supplies logged. Engines cooled. Outside, soldiers extinguished flares. Lanterns flickered off one by one. The camp darkened, leaving behind scattered points of weak light. Patton stood in the tent doorway. He looked out the field, empty now, but for men moving quietly. The ridge behind him was silent, conquered, hollow. The tank sat still, hulks against the dark. He exhaled slowly. The night air tasted of smoke and effort. He raised a hand and touched his helmet brim. "Tomorrow," he said, "we move again." He stepped into the tent, letting the flap close softly behind him. The turning point stood carved in the earth. The war had changed, and they knew it.